Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Jane Jorgenson, and I'm a supervisor at the Madison Public Library in Madison, Wisconsin. I'll be moderating today's panel, The Edge of Your Seat. The thrillers we're going to discuss today deliver secret societies, buried truths, and shocking revelations designed to keep readers guessing until the final page. With us today, I'm happy to introduce Justin Halpern, whose Get Lost comes from Cardinal, Hachette. Shari Lapena, who's Getting Away with Murder, comes from Pamela Dorman books, like Penguin Random House. Charlie Lovett, The Paradox Club from Hyperion Avenue Disney. Alex Myers, While We Were Silent, Severn House. And Richard Russo, Under the Falls from Knopf, Penguin Random House. Welcome, everyone. I'm going to start out today with, now that we've had the introductions, I will ask each of you to tell us a little bit, give us a little description of your book so that readers know what we're talking about. I'll start with Justin.
Yeah. So my book Get Lost, it's about this woman in her early 30s who is estranged from her father, who is this like gregarious rogue who everyone loves, but has been a terrible father to her. And at the beginning of the book, she gets a call saying that her mother has gone missing. And she's like, my mom goes missing a lot. She's got mental health issues. It's not fine, but it's fine. She'll come back. And they say, well, this time it's a little different. The police think your father killed her. So she goes back to her small town and with her estranged father tries to figure out what happened to her mom.
Thank you. How about you, Shari?
Almost forgot to turn on my audio. So my new book that's out in July is called Getting Away with Murder, and it's about a couple, Jill and Ted, who have been living a wonderful lifestyle in a gorgeous brownstone that they renovated, and they're about to run out of money. So Ted's older brother, whose name I've now forgotten, is very wealthy, and Ted is his heir. So they decide that all their problems would, thank you, all their problems would be solved if they commit one perfect murder. So this book is about, are they going to get away with it? And they think they committed the perfect murder, but we'll just have to read it to find out.
Okay. How about you, Charlie?
So the Paradox Club is about a young woman, Tess Maxwell, who was very close to her father. He was an astrophysicist, and when she was a child, they would lie out on the dock at their lake house in Wisconsin, and he would teach her about physics and about life and about the universe. And he died under mysterious circumstances about 10 years ago. She is also estranged from her parents. She's estranged from her mother because her mother blames her for her father's death. At the same time, we're following the story of the Paradox Club itself, this sort of secret scientific club in New York City that may be holding the future of mankind in its hands. And there is a battle raging within that club, and Tess gradually finds herself being sucked into that battle, and begins to learn things about her father and other members of her family. And eventually she has to go back to that lake and that dock and figure out the answer to the mysteries of who she is, her identity, what happened to her father, and the mysteries of the universe.
Okay. And Alex.
Sure. All right. While We Were Silent is set in 2015. It's a dark academy mystery about the first woman head of school at a New England prep school. And she comes on board just as the Me Too movement is sort of heating up, and it oversees a investigation into historical cases of sexual misconduct, riling some of the old boys of the school. So when some murders occur on the campus, she's left to figure out how she's going to protect herself, protect her students, and bring this prep school into the 21st century.
Thank you. And Rick.
Hi. Under the Falls is a strange book for me in some ways. It's about a musician who's become very famous. His name is Tyler. He's become very famous. He's gone off to, he's left the place that he grew up. It's called Stone Mountain. And he's left when he's 18 years old. And he goes to Nashville and he becomes a very, very famous musician. I don't know, think, any of those Nashville musicians. But he's now set to return to Stone Mountain. And by the way, the name of his band is Stone Mountain. And every time, every band he's ever played in has been named Stone Mountain. And so he's now set to return to the place that he fled at 18. And it's now almost 18 years later. And when he returns to Stone Mountain, he discovers that not everybody is a Tyler Sinclair fan. And things quickly, murderously go south from there.
Thank you so much. All right. Justin, Get Lost is your first novel, and a crime caper at that. Can you tell us about the genesis of the story and how you approached the storytelling? In what ways was it different than your biographical and media writing?
Yeah, I mean, I was really interested in a relationship, a sibling or a child-parent relationship where the person who is actually the good person no one likes because they're very abrasive, and the person who's actually kind of a piece of shit everyone absolutely loves because they don't know him more than through, surface level. And so I like this idea of sort of how you let anger go, how you let anger go so that you can move on in your life. And so that idea really intrigued me, of a child having to figure out how to let go of anger, not necessarily apologize, but let go of the anger they have at their parents so that they can just move on in their life. And that was coupled with, I had read this story about a small bar in Central California where a guy walked into the bar, there was only one exit, and he never walked out and no one ever found him. And so that sort of locked door mystery coupled with sort of this idea of these two characters that I wanted to explore in this relationship was kind of how I came to Get Lost.
Great. Alex, like Justin, you've ventured into new writing territory with this mystery thriller. What was the jumping off point for the development of your story? And did you find the mechanics of having to solve the mystery made it easier or more complicated to create?
Yeah. Never written a murder mystery before, but read a whole bunch. And drew a lot from my experience both going to a prep school and working at a prep school, particularly while some of the schools were going through those investigations and being covered in national media and the what happens under the intense scrutiny at that time. I will admit I thought it was going to be pretty easy to write a murder mystery, and I kept getting beta readers to take a look, and they'd be like, "I can guess the killer on page 2." I was like, I am really, really bad at guessing the killer, so I thought I would help the reader out, but I did a little too much helping, so I kept having to go back and obfuscate more and more. So hopefully it works in the final version.
It did. I did not guess it. And I've read many mysteries. Didn't get it.
Thank you.
So good job. Charlie, with yours, I was impressed by how you wove physics and the metaphysical into a race against time thriller plot. What came first, and then how did you go about researching for this one? Excuse me.
So the very first moment for this novel was I was literally sitting on my back porch during COVID, and for some reason I was remembering this old console radio from the 1940s that we had in our attic when I was growing up. And I thought, what if you had a radio like that and it actually still received the same shows it received when it was first made? And even though that didn't quite make it into the novel, that was the beginning of something that was going to be a mystery that also had to do with some science and some physics. And then the next thing that came was Tess, was the character. I mean, I really like to know my characters pretty well before I get them involved in too much trouble. So I got to know her and understand her. She has OCD. She has some anxiety. She's sort of beginning the novel in a mental health crisis. And so I really needed to kind of do some research on that side of things, because there was a lot about that I didn't know, and that was actually really fascinating. As far as the physics research, I mean, I knew I couldn't make it too complicated. I wanted readers to be able to understand it. I'm not a physicist, so I thought, well, if I can understand it, maybe they can. So I really relied on my high school physics class, college, introduction to astronomy. And I'm not ashamed to say that I'm a huge fan of the Big Bang Theory. And Sheldon Cooper was a big help to me. And then, millions of videos on YouTube explaining different aspects of physics were extremely helpful too.
And Shari, you certainly challenged yourself by having protagonists who are not very likable in their own right, and then you have them murder someone in the first pages of the book, which totally hooked me. You had me. Talk to us about how you built your narrative and the pacing of the story.
Well, yes, I wanted to do something a little different with this one because I have the murder right off the bat. And normally my books are about finding out who done it, but this one is we see them commit a murder and it looks like they should get away with it, and they probably should. I've always been interested in the idea of the perfect murder and how to get away with it. So I was indulging myself a bit. But I started with the murder, and I actually I never knew if I wanted them to get away with it or not. I don't plan, so I just wanted to put them in the situation and see how the characters dealt with it. And what I was really interested in the beginning was how they would feel about having killed someone. I wanted to see if they felt remorse, if they felt worried about getting caught. So it was that sort of character development as the book went on that I found really interesting. So they could easily get away with it. They could easily, have some problems. I don't want to give anything away, but their relationship really shifts through the book. The wife gets annoyed at the husband about some of the mistakes he's made that put them at risk. And there's a lot of tension in the book.
Yes, there is. And Rick, a note at the end of your book says that the novel began as a TV pilot script. I'm curious about how having a script to convert affected your writing of the novel. Did it make the process easier or just different?
Yeah, this book has such an odd history. I had decided it was during the strike, and like a lot of writers who also write for television and the movies, I was wondering what I might do. And I had a couple of friends. I had this crazy idea about this guy that goes back to his hometown. And these friends and I decided that maybe what I would write a pilot, and then after the pilot, we'd all get together when the strike was over. Isn't that hilarious? We'd all get together when the strike was over, and we'd divide the narrative up and write it. The problem was that the strike kind of isn't over even now, all those years later. And I just got impatient. I just decided, you know what? And I asked the other people that I was going to work with. I said, I just want to. I can't sit around here doing nothing. And I want to write this as a novel. And these were good folks that I was working with, and they said, yes, by all means, go ahead. And so, kind of, I reversed the process that I and an awful lot of writers go through, which is write a novel and then somehow turn it into a screenplay. And this got written in reverse order.
Alex, an elite prep school that has served wealthy families for generations, is the kind of setting that many readers find appealing. But your novel explores the darker side of the ways in which traditions can create lifelong damage. Tell us about how you wove those darker themes into your novel.
Sure. Well, as I said, I've both gone to and then worked at a number of prep schools, and all of them have traditions, and many of those traditions are super light and fun and engaging and what create a wonderful culture. But a lot of those traditions are also strange. When you try to explain them to an outsider, people are often like, "What? That's not okay," or "Why would you do that?" And so my career has gone on, I've had more and more of those conversations. And so in writing this fiction, it was fun to take some of those ideas and extend them just a little bit further. Maybe something that's a way of welcoming, students into a dorm takes on a little bit of a darker edge. So it's one of those, I think, frequent cases in fiction where real life provides a nice basis, and it's just kind of shading it up or shading it down a little bit to make it work within fiction. But it was very fun to base some things on reality and to imagine a school with a culture that internally seems really, really quite normal to them, just another prep school, and to make it take on that darker edge.
Rick, in your novel, the depressed economic conditions of your rural town in upstate New York is a major factor impacting your characters' lives, past and present. This seems appropriate as you delve into themes of personal history and whether we can ever escape our own paths. Can you talk a bit about how you develop the trajectories for each of your characters?
Yeah, this is more than most thrillers. I think this book is very place centric.
Mhm.
And because I don't normally write thrillers, I sent a draft of the book to my editor, who wrote back and said, I think what you're doing here, because you haven't written thrillers before, is you're kind of bending your knee to the thriller. And she said, what I'd like you to do instead is make the thriller bend its knee to you, if possible, and said, I would love for you to go back and write this book where we get a chance to find out about this place, Stone Mountain, before you ever turn any of your characters loose in it. So God love her, that's what I did. And there's now a prologue in the thing that hadn't been there before that simply lets us adjust to the world that we're going to live in. And strangely enough, imagine this, it turns out to be a lot like other Richard Russo novels that aren't that aren't thrillers. But it was such a joy to do that way, to realize that I could still write a book that my readers would understand as a Richard Russo novel, even as it was trying to do something a little bit different than what I normally do.
All right. Shari, Jill and Ted's deepest desire is to hold on to the life and the brownstone they have. And yet each decision they make further endangers that desire and amps up the tension. Talk about your characters, the protagonists and the supporting cast, and how you lead readers to understand them, even if we don't always like them.
Well, the way I learn about my characters is just by writing them. So when I start out, I don't know who they are or how they're going to react to anything. So with each scene that I create, I learn a little bit more about them. So, I put the two characters together, Jill and Ted, and I watch how they interact and how they conflict, basically. And that opens up a chasm between them. And then I've got all these other characters who are rather malevolent. We've got the investigator from the Coast Guard who, he's a little suspicious about what happened on the boat, even though there's absolutely no evidence. So they should be able to completely get away with it because there will always be a reasonable doubt when you've got a death at sea like that, and no witnesses. But he's got his own sort of, and I didn't realize this until I got into him. He's got his own axe to grind, and he goes rogue a little bit too, and he does some things he's not supposed to do. And the same with some of the other characters in the book. The cleaning lady, everyone's got their own motivations, their own reasons for doing the things that they do, and it all becomes very complicated and meshed. They all become quite enmeshed in each other's lives, and so it's not something I plan. It's something that grows organically out of the situation and how my characters make their decisions, which drive the plot along and invariably make things far, far worse for everyone. So yeah, in terms of how I get into my characters, I just explore them when I'm inside their heads in their point of view.
So it sounds like you're more of a seat of the pants kind of writer versus a deep outliner.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
All right. Justin, there's a lot of dry humor in your book underpinning the thriller aspects as Lila and her father seek answers, and because of their necessary proximity, are also forced to confront their own painful past. Tell us about developing that balance and delving into deep dysfunction and incorporating humor, all while your characters are solving a mystery.
Yeah, I mean, for me, some of my favorite dramas and thrillers have tons of comedy in them. I come from television. I'm a comedy writer, um, written in comedy my entire life. And as I got older, it's just, I've had so many relationships with people uh, that have been toxic and yet very funny. And so I feel like for me, if I can find a story that feels propulsive and feels like you want to turn the page, but really what you're getting out of it is a better understanding of two people in their relationship or multiple people in their relationship. In the case of Get Lost, I was like, I that this relationship on the outside is funny. Um, and then as you dig deeper into it, there's a lot of like pain behind it. And I think that a lot of people who are hurt mask their hurt with humor. And so that all felt part of the same world that I wanted to live in. And also I just can't write anything if I can't write some jokes too. So that was a big part of it.
I tend to be a victim of my own sarcastic traits sometimes too, so I totally understand that. Charlie, The Paradox Club is a puzzle type thriller, a battle to save the world, and an exploration of lasting grief. Can you discuss the roles each of those elements played in the novel and how they interacted with each other?
Sure. The creation of this novel is a little strange for me. I did not set out to write a thriller, and I did not set out to write speculative fiction, and somehow I ended up doing both. And a part of that was because I wrote half of this novel, and then I sort of thought I knew where it was going to go, but I didn't know how to get there. And so I set it aside. I wrote another book. I ended up changing agents, and my new agent said, "Well, tell me, do you have any like half-finished product? What have you got?" And I sent him descriptions of several half-finished projects, and he said, "Oh, this one, write this one." And coming back to it, I don't know, maybe 3 years later, I suddenly was able to see the path that the second half of the novel had to take, and that it was a path that had a lot in common with a thriller. Um, and so I think what the novel ended up being is like a Russian nesting doll. To me, at the center, at the core, is Tessa's relationships with those around her, with her father, whom she loves so dearly, with her mother, who she has very mixed feelings about because she still loves her as a mother, but she's estranged from her, and then with this family friend who she calls Aunt Vivian, who seems to be kind of maybe slipping into dementia, but is really the one person who's been there for her all along. So that's sort of at the core, and then that's nested in this battle that's going on in the Paradox Club to protect the universe, essentially. And then because those are the things that are happening, inevitably your third layer is the fast-moving thriller, the people being in danger. I wrote that first half. I left her in a very dangerous place, so it was nice to come back and rescue her in the end.
All right, Rick, you too explore themes of grief, guilt, and loss, but meld them seamlessly with the thriller beats. How do you see the purpose of those elements and did you develop both simultaneously or build one first?
I'm sorry, I missed part of that. The
Sorry.
two elements were what?
Sorry, I can restart. I'll restate it. You too explore themes of grief, guilt, and loss, but meld them seamlessly with thriller beats. How do you see the purpose of those elements? And do you develop both simultaneously or did you build one first?
Well, the guilt. I'm glad you mentioned guilt because that's really at the heart of a lot of what's going on in this book. And I think the reason that I went there is that over the course of my now 4 decades of writing novels, I have returned to my hometown, which I have fictionalized under various names. I have gone back to that fictional town, to that town in upstate New York that I am from, again and again and again. I call it different things. I call it Mohawk. I call it, Thomaston. I call it North Bath. But I keep going back and back and back to it. And that was always fine with my readers, and also fine with my hometown because, it said right there on the cover of the book that it was fiction. But then one time in my memoir, I wrote about my hometown and called it Gloversville. And I discovered when I did how many people there were back in my hometown who were, I don't want to say necessarily antagonistic or resentful, but they were very aware of the fact that I had built a very nice, comfortable living for myself, writing about them and their lives. And now here I had turned on them in some way, wrote about the community in ways that weren't always flattering. And the sense that I got from a lot of people in my hometown was, yeah, great. You've got a really nice life out of looking at us and our lives. Where's our cut?
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of what the guilt of that, or my sense that in some sense, my sense that they're right, that I have indeed gone back and taken and taken and taken from this community. And they probably haven't gotten as much in return from me as I've gotten from them. And I've used that for my main character in this book, Tyler, to come home and realize that he's done the same thing with Stone Mountain. He's made his fortune off this place, and goes back and discovers, oh, geez, look at that. Not everybody is a Tyler Sinclair fan.
So interesting. Thank you. Alex, much of your story revolves around past and present hurt and trauma and the lingering effects it can have on those involved. Nobody gets out unscathed, but some choose to let the past go in order to move on with their lives. How did you envision this aspect of the story, and what to do with each character?
Yeah, it's interesting. Some characters, it was really easy. One of the main characters is a investigator named Dina, who has her own slightly more distant past with Greendale Academy, where the novel is set. And she, just by re-encountering the place as an adult and no longer being the child that she was when she first visited, I think is able to reconcile the progress she's made in her own life and really say, I'm way beyond that. I don't need to do much with that. The other main character, Luce, who's the new head of school of Greendale, I think has a much harder time coming to terms with a more recent set of traumas. And indeed, I think the complexity of her character is probably one that I've felt in my own life, and I've had friends and family who've dealt with as well, which is, when do you simply have to compromise? When can you not insist on what feels like fairness or pure justice? And how do you live with something that might make you feel like you may have compromised and you may have let some people get away with perhaps not a terrible crime, but something that they ought not to. And Luce, I think, like many leaders in education and beyond, has to make that decision that for the better of a larger group, she's going to let a few smaller players get away with something pretty terrible.
Right. Shari, your novel is a thriller with an intensifying pace, while also being an interpersonal drama about the choices people make, sometimes against their own best interest. Can you tell us how you were able to use those choices and the consequences thereof to build the tension?
That's a hard question. That sort of puts the conscious mind front and center. How did I make their choices create the tension? With me, it's all quite unconscious. I don't think about, it's very hard to explain. It's sort of natural when people make bad decisions, things get worse, and I don't actually have an answer for your question in terms of how I make it happen, because it happens when I'm in their head. So I use multiple points of view, and I get in the head of one character and he's thinking in one way and he's going in one way. And then I get into the head of his wife and she's thinking in another way and going in another direction, and they're conflicting all the time. And I have other characters with their own motivations who are seeing things differently and wanting to come in another angle. And it's not like I have a master plan of how I use these different steps to create tension. I create tension mostly through being in the heads of the characters and feeling their emotions. So my books are very emotional, and it's the emotion of the characters and their fear and their panic. and their distress that sort of drives them forward all the time. So the tension and the pacing, I mean, I tighten it up in revision, but it's kind of natural. And I get to it by really getting deep, and it's very hot point of view. It's a very emotional point of view that I'm in.
So interesting, because the reason I had the question was because the tension in the book is really all about the repercussions of each choice they make, sort of as they go along. So it's interesting that it's coming so lively from your head rather than if this, then this, if this, then this, to set out that to create, to ramp up. So thank you.
Tension for me is not a conscious choice. I mean, I always want to go for it, but I go for it by feeling the emotions of the characters.
Nice. Thank you. Charlie, you used the section set in the past of Harry and Tess talking physics on the dock when they did to good effect. It was such an elegant way to build up your reader's knowledge base without info dumping. Talk about that aspect of the storytelling, your research, and if there are things you had to make sure to add or bits of research or intriguing information that you might have had to leave out.
Well, first, those were some of my favorite sections to write. I mean, there's this novel's told in a lot of different ways, but there's two sections with Tess, two sets of sections, one with her dad on the dock and one with various different therapists that she talks to over the years, which are scenes, in both cases, they're scenes, just dialogue between two people, no attributions, nothing else, just the dialogue. And I think it's my background as a playwright that makes me enjoy writing those kind of scenes, because to me, writing dialogue is a great way to get into the heads of the characters. And yeah, I am very aware of needing to get information to my readers without saying, no, let's stop the action of this book and have somebody come on and give us a lecture. You know, that kind of drives me crazy. The scenes on the dock, I mean, he's teaching her about physics and about life simultaneously. And it's amazing as I started to think about what I knew about physics, how often those things overlap, and how a lot of what a physicist calls physics, we just call common sense. If you take a cup of hot coffee and put it outdoors on a cold day, that coffee is going to cool off, right? We call that obvious. A physicist calls that the second law of thermodynamics, right? And a good example of how he sort of teaches Tess about life through physics is he's talking about if an object is sitting there unmoving, it's going to continue to not move until it gets acted on by a force. That's Newton's first law, inertia. But then he says to Tess, but you are your own outside force. And so he tells her that even though, yeah, if she's not going anywhere, it's up to her to be that force that makes herself go someplace. So I was really looking for parts of physics, not just that I could explain and that we could understand, and that it would make sense to explain to a precocious 12-year-old, but that would also somehow relate to what was going on in her life or to ideas about herself that she might need later on in the book as she's facing these challenges. And so that was really the litmus test for does this little bit of physics go in or not go in? Can it connect to what she needs as a character? And can she learn something as a child from that discussion that is then going to apply later in her life?
Justin, your mystery revolves around the venal actions of the characters, great and small, and still I found so much heart in their journey. How did you create and sustain that aspect?
Yeah, I mean, for me, and I think other people on the panel have said this as well, but like for me, it starts with the characters first. They have to drive, their wants and desires have to drive the story, and I have to care about them, and I have to make the audience care about them. I feel like coming from television, it's very much show, don't tell. And so I wanted readers to get to know these characters and care about these characters based on the actions that they take in the book and in the ways that they react to the things that are happening. That's how I wanted to get people invested in them. And, I feel like if I can understand a character's journey in a story and their arc and kind of where I want to get them to, that's how I want to at least start writing. And then Shari said, sometimes the characters take on a life of their own, and you realize that's actually not where they should end up. They should end up somewhere else. They're telling me they want to end up somewhere else. And that was kind of what happened in this book. I had an idea of where I wanted them to end emotionally, and because of the way that I felt about them and what they would do, actually ended in a different way. But yeah, I think for me, it all starts with the characters.
Right. Shari, as I've mentioned, there is not a question of who committed the murder. We know who did it from the beginning. Yours is more of a how fast can it all fall apart when others threaten it story. Can you tell about any ways in which this changed how you constructed the novel? I'm guessing how you've talked about it, maybe not, but you said that this is the first where we know who the killer is. Most of the rest we're figuring out the killer. So did that change how you were writing it?
Question.
Oh, sorry. Did Shari freeze maybe? All right. I'll come back to Shari. Shari will jump. Shari dropped away. She'll be back in a minute. We'll come back to her. Charlie, your novel is told from multiple viewpoints and across time periods. Talk about how you get into each character's head and show us why and who they are.
So, I mean, part of it has to do with having done a lot of theater. I mean, it's the same way you approach a character if you're acting. I also think I'm not always thinking about this when I write a scene that's sort of a thriller scene, but I do love the old idea about asking yourself, what's the worst thing that could possibly happen to this character in this situation, and then have that happen and then make them deal with it. So I will literally sit back and close my eyes and think, okay, if I were this person, how would I deal with this situation? But there's a real dichotomy for me in thinking about, say, Tess, who is my heroine, and I love her, and I'm with her 100% of the way, and her antagonist, this woman who's trying to take over the Paradox Club and do evil things. So, like, in a way, it's easier to put myself in the shoes of the character who I want to succeed, but it's kind of more fun to put myself in the shoes of the bad guy, because that allows you to do things like Shari is saying, it allows you to do things like plan the perfect murder without actually going to jail for 50 years, So I noticed that difference between the good guys and the bad guys. And then the other thing that I do in this novel, especially with Tess, is think about how can a character turn something that she may feel is a weakness into a strength. And she gets advice, along these lines from her Aunt Vivian. But how can she take, for instance, her OCD, her anxiety, and turn that into something positive when she's in a dangerous situation? And that's again, like, sort of putting myself in her brain as much as I possibly can to say, okay, how could I shift this and make something that the reader is going to think is going to be a negative in this situation turn into a positive?
Justin, Lila, and Dix found some closure in their investigation and seemed to come to, at the least, a détente in their relationship. If you were to write their next chapter, where and how would you see them next?
Well, I think for me, I wanted to write a story that wasn't about someone who'd done something, someone who had been wronged looking for an apology, and instead a story about someone who had been wronged knowing that the person who wronged them might not change all that much. So how do you move forward? So for me, I think I sort of leave the ending as this moment for for Lila to understand that, like, she has set down all of this anger, and now the world is open to her. What is she going to do? And so I feel like the next part of that story is seeing for her is how do I now build a life now that I'm not carrying around all this animosity towards this guy? And for Dix, her father, who has sort of never faced a consequence he couldn't wiggle out of, I think for him it's realizing that although sometimes he may get away scot-free with things, he leaves a trail of people behind him who face those same consequences. And so I think for him, it's am I going to actually look behind me and look at that trail of people and face maybe what I am responsible for.
Rick, I think I know some of the answer to this question, but I'm just curious. Your characters are all shades of gray people, and each plays an integral part of the story. Is there one you consider to be the protagonist of the book? You've mentioned Tyler, but to me, Tyler starts it, and I thought Tyler's the protagonist, but then it kind of uh, moves into other people's perspectives for good portions of the book. So perhaps I'm asking if you did a reverse Uno and now develop this as a TV pilot, who would be the star?
Oh, I like all the characters in this book a lot, and I really like character, but his old friend Kurt, that I just love that guy. He hurts so much, and when I'm with him, I'm just really enjoying the book a lot. And I love Officer Deb when I'm in her when I'm in her point of view. I mean, her backstory is so interesting because she's a black woman in this really lily white upstate New York town, and you see and you see how um, and her mother in particular too. You see how things have been for them, and I think my rule of thumb with all of my novels is that since it's going to take me, they take, what do they take? I don't know. This one didn't take quite as long, but they tend to take a year, 2 years, 3 years, sometimes the bigger ones, 4 years. I just want to be with people during that time that don't bore me. Before I can entertain you, these people have to entertain me. And so, I mean, drifting from character to character in this book, and especially towards the end when Kurt and Tyler get together one last time for that final, really, really emotional scene about what has to happen for things to go forward, for them to have a friendship again. That's where my heart is to arrive at emotional moments like that, but also entertaining ones. I like these people first and foremost to entertain me, and if they're not doing that, I know that something terrible is wrong that has to get addressed.
And entertaining seems like a strange word to me when we talk about it because there's so much heartbreak in all of your characters' lives. But I was certainly drawn to them all. All right, and Alex, I love the women at the heart of your story. Tell us about how you built their journey as they investigated, and if you think it ends here, or if you could see another chapter for them.
Thank you. I love them too. It's fun to grow fond of characters and to let them make mistakes and all that. So I think where I understand the two main characters, Luce is the head of Greendale Academy, and she's at the helm of this school and very much feels like this is what she has fought in her career to achieve. You know, the first female head of school, this is where she's wanted to be. She's really risen through the ranks of school administration. And the other woman, Dina, who's an attorney and investigating these historic sexual assaults, this is not where she thought she would be. She didn't think she'd be coming back to her hometown. She didn't think she'd be investigating Greendale Academy. She sort of intended to say farewell to her past and launch as an attorney and escape all that. So they're coming at this moment from two opposite directions and then collide. And I was excited to see what they would make of each other as two women with power who have been and are being thwarted by this old boys network. And then I was excited to see what they would do with each other. Like other authors here have said, I got to know them on the page, a little bit off the page. I got to explore and have them take some dead ends that I then had to rewrite. But definitely by the time I reached the end, I had only grown more fond of them and would love to carry them forward, particularly Dina, in terms of, I think ends the novel at a point where she's really just launching the beginning of what could be a career in that area.
Okay. And welcome back, Shari. As I had mentioned, as you had mentioned, there's not a question of who committed the murder in your book. We know who did it from the beginning. Yours is more of how fast can it fall apart when others threaten it story. Tell us about the ways in which this changed how you constructed the novel, if it did change it. You talked about how mostly your mysteries, we don't know who killed them, and this one we do. So was it a change for you?
It didn't change how I approached writing the novel. Oh,
Yep, there you go.
First of all, let me apologize for my little dropout. We lost our internet connection, but I'm back. I didn't approach it any differently this time. So it sounds odd, but I mean, I was able to, something would come up that would put them under threat and they would have to deal with it. People would, I don't want to give anything away. I don't want to give any spoilers. No. So that's the problem in talking about this novel, but something that they did not anticipate at all happens. And, you think you've got the perfect plan, but there's always something to trip you up. But it's not insolvable. They can still get away with it. So it's how they handle what's come up and whether they can stay as a cohesive pair and also keep their shit together when they're under investigation. So there's a lot of tension about whether they're going to be able to do those two things. I approached it in the same way that I approach all my novels. Things happen, more terrible things happen. It didn't change the way I wrote at all.
I will say earlier on, you talked about how you're always thinking about how to kill people. And I will admit that there are times when I'm driving around in a stretch and think, well, that's a good spot to stash a body. That looks like a pretty isolated spot where a body could be. So it comes with the territory, I think, of reading and writing these books. We've got just a minute or two left. Does anybody have anything in the works? Next novels you're working on you want to tell us about? Now we'll call on Charlie.
I just finished I don't even want to call it the first draft yet, but we're off to England for a month in a couple days, and I have a stack of papers to take with me to revise on the novel that's about friendship and art and ethics, maybe. I don't know. It's still an early version, so it's hard to say too much about what it's about.
But you, Justin?
Well, like Rick said, I wrote this novel during the TV writer's strike because I couldn't write any TV. So I am back. I'm writing I created a show for Netflix that's coming out next year, and so I'm currently working on that. But I hope to write more. I hope to write another novel at some point.
I hope you do. Alex?
I'm back with my first love, historical fiction, and working on something set in the late 1800s about a traveling Wild West show a la Bill Cody's.
What? Right. And Rick?
I'm working on some short stories right now, kind of a palate cleanser sort of thing, but also because my publisher reminded me the other day my agent reminded me the other day that I had promised my publisher a book of those. so I kind of need to get going.
And Shari?
I'm writing another thriller, and it's in early days, so I can't really say too much about it.
And Justin, you can't tell us what your Netflix show is?
Yeah, no, I can. It's based off of a memoir that I wrote in 2013. It's called I Suck at Girls, and it's like a sort of teenage, coming of age, sort of R-rated look at high school life through the eyes of a kid who desperately wants to be a man, but is entering high school 5 feet tall and hairless. So.
Well, I will certainly be looking for that. And I have so enjoyed hearing all about your books more in depth. Thank you for joining us. Our next two panels are Culinary Adventures and Secrets and Spies. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.